Now that is what I imagine the picture would look like. Hello and welcome to Pictorial Planet. My name is John Finch. Today we're going to be looking at Geoffrey Crawley's FX11. This was his developer for enhancing film speed. He got up to a one-stop speed increase with some films, and I've in fact seen that in my testing of this developer. HP5 gives me an EI of 800 and FP4 an EI of 250. That's quite a boost to film speed, and Crawley believed that FX11 was in fact the most effective developer available to increase film speed, and it's easy to make at home. I'm going to show you what you need to make it, and I'm going to show you the results. So let's get over to the darkroom and take a look. And here's my FX11 working solution here, and I'm just going to talk about what goes into this and some important things to know about the contents of this developer. So there are 3 developing agents that are used in this developer. We have phenidone. I'm using Dimezone S as my phenidone in this developer, and if you ever do use Dimezone S, and the reason you might buy that, by the way, is because it lasts longer than phenidone. If you use Dimezone S, then multiply the amount of phenidone in your developer by 1.4 to get the correct amount of Dimezone S to use. You use slightly more of this than regular phenidone A or phenidone B. So it uses phenidone, it uses hydroquinone, and it uses glycin. And these are the 3 developing agents that are used in the developer. Now, the hydroquinone isn't actually working as a developing agent in the FX11 solution because the alkalinity of the developer is too low to kick this off as a full developer. However, it does support the other developing agents, particularly the phenidone. It regenerates the phenidone and allows it to keep working longer and more quickly. Now, when you mix this developer, and I'm going to put up the contents of the developer on the screen now, when you mix it, put the hydroquinone in first, fully dissolve it, and then put in your phenidone, or Dimezone S in my case. That will protect the phenidone from oxidizing. The hydroquinone regenerates any previously oxidized phenidone quite well. And of course then you put in your glycin, and the glycin is a very interesting chemical, and I want to just show you this. This glycin has gone bad, and you'll see if I pour a little bit of it out, if I can show it to the camera, you can see it's gone brown. And if your glycin goes like that, it has gone bad and doesn't work very well. You want it to be a kind of light grey, almost a light tan grey colour, and that's good glycin. And the way to keep glycin is to keep it in the freezer. In its bottle, I put it into the freezer in a freezer bag with no air in the freezer bag, so it really protects the glycin and keeps it frozen, and it lasts a long time like that. Here's my glycin in its freezer bag. You can see what I've done here, and I'm going to take one out and just show you what it looks like when it's a bit fresher than that one. Let's take this one here. I'm just going to have a look. Here we are. So as you can see there, if I just focus this there, you can see it's a much more pale tan color, and it starts off gray and it goes to tan like this, and then it slowly goes browner and browner until it's not much good anymore. So I'll pop that back in. So I pop them up tight tops into the freezer bag, close the bag up. Make sure we're focused on them. Close the bag up and just make sure there's no air. Closed it up a bit too quickly there. Get as much air out as possible. There, really tight. Now, after you've had them in the freezer for a little while, just make sure the tops are tight because they might come a little loose when they get cold. There's another thing to know about glycin, and that is it doesn't dissolve very easily in water unless the water is alkaline, and then it starts to dissolve much more easily. So with the FX11, I added the glycin, stirred it, and then a little bit of the borax. It didn't take much, just a little bit of borax, and that made the water alkaline enough to dissolve the rest of the glycin. And then I carried on with the formula. So that's a little bit of extra information about using this glycin. It's not cheap, so you need to know how to keep it from going bad. So there's the three developing agents. We of course have a preservative, and this is sodium sulfite in this particular developer, and you'll notice from the formula there's a lot of sodium sulfite in this developer, 125 grams. And the reason Crawley did that is probably to minimize the grain in the final negatives, because any speed enhancing developers tend to increase grain, and he didn't want the grain to increase in this developer. He wanted the enhanced speed, the one-stop speed increase, but without the larger grain size of a one-stop speed increase. And so he added a lot of sodium sulfite, 125 grams. And he has an alkaline in there, borax. It's one of the more common alkalines that were used back in the day. It's quite a mild alkaline compared to many of the others we've seen before, like sodium carbonate and sodium hydroxide. Both of them are much more alkaline than this. And this is the same alkaline that's used in D76. So he's keeping the activity of the developer quite low by using a low alkalinity. And that again will help to keep the grain as small as possible. So we don't get big chunky lumps of grain. We keep it nice and fine. And finally, he uses something to minimize any fog that might develop on the film, and that's potassium bromide. And he uses a very small amount, only half a gram of potassium bromide. And the reason for that is probably to enhance the film speed, because the more bromide you put into a developer, the slower the film speed is going to be. So this is kept to a minimum. He's obviously had to add a little because he's felt there was some fog on the film, but that small amount is just enough to keep the fog at bay. And there's one more thing worth mentioning about these. The borax alkaline that he's used creates a little bit, he believed, of a sheen on the negative. And that sheen helps to hide grain as well. So that was another reason he may have chosen borax as his alkaline. And that pretty much covers it. The glycin, if you want to know where to buy glycin, have a look at my website. And you'll see under one of the pages, I think it's resources, you will see where you can buy this in Europe and in America. It's not cheap, but it's a good developing agent, and there's quite a few very good formulas that use it. So I recommend buying some and using it in some of those formulas. That pretty much covers what's in FX11 and why it's in FX11. So how does he get his one-stop speed increase? Well, it's through the use of the phenidone and the glycin. These two developing agents can enhance your film speed, particularly the phenidone. We've seen that before. For instance, Barry Thornton added phenidone to disaxole in order to enhance the film speed a little. And many other developers use phenidone because of its better film speed than metol and catechol and some of the other developing agents. And add to that the glycin, and you've got yourself this whole one-stop speed enhancement of the film without affecting your grain too much. So it's quite an exciting developer for those people who need that extra film speed, who are maybe shooting inside a lot. You'll get that extra film speed from this without having to push your film at all in another developer. Of course, pushing is a whole different ball game. We're not pushing film with FX11. It's purely enhancing the toe of the film and the development of those silver halides on your negative that were just touched by light. So they were in the darkest area of the negative, what we call the toe of the negative. And this developer is very sensitive to developing those silver halides. So it's bringing your shadow detail up whilst not enhancing the highlights. That's this extra sensitivity that this developer manages to eke out of your film. So it's very useful for people who may be shooting indoors a lot and need that extra film speed and don't want to have to go to a faster film. Remember, Crawley said categorically you'll get better results from a slower film than a faster film. You'll get better negatives. And when he said better negatives, he meant easier to print, more detail, potentially more acutance. So he was talking about those kind of negatives. Let's go over and look at what the negatives from this developer produce. They're quite thin, and that's exactly what Crawley wanted. Here we're looking at some FP4 negatives, and I shot these negatives at an EI of 250, and I developed them in stock solution of FX11 for 5 minutes. And that was right, that's a good time for your FP4. If you want to use HP5, I tested that, and that gives me an EI of 800, and I used a development time of 8 minutes to get the right contrast. And Crawley said with this developer, you want the thinnest possible negatives that will give you the right contrast, i.e. it will print at grade 3 for 35mm or grade 2 for 120. That is the right contrast level for this developer. And the reason he said that is because thinner negatives will give you finer grain. So again, he was trying to combat any enlargement of grain due to the speed enhancing effect of this developer. If you imagine what you've got here is a developer that is very sensitive to the lower levels of exposure, so it finds those grains of silver halide that have had very small amount of light and reduces them to silver. But as it's doing that, there's going to be an element of grain clumping, and that is where the fine microscopic seeding of that particular crystal starts to spread as it develops to other crystals around it, and it starts to clump. So the small fine grain of silver becomes a bigger and fatter and more clumped grain of silver, growing all the time. So he's used various techniques to try to reduce grain clumping, and it's a difficult thing to balance. He wants to get these halides, these fine halides that have just had enough light to be seeded and start to develop. He wants that, but he doesn't want the clumping that comes with it. There's a particular photograph on here, this one here that I took. It was in a dark and dingy part of the forest, and it's of some pine needles on a branch. And I think I'm going to print that one. But first, let's scan this one in to the computer and have a look at the grain and the sharpness. This has been scanned in on my Nikon 9000 DD, and it's straight from that 35mm negative that we saw earlier. The detail is actually very good. Look at the spider's web that was captured. This was photographed on a Pentax MX with a Pentax 50mm f4 macro lens. So it's a very good lens. But look at this, it's very nice indeed. I do like the contrast of the light and dark. I think if it had some vignette around the edges, it would make it more interesting. It would focus the eye into the center here. Let's zoom in and look at the grain we've got. And it's not bad. That's 100% zoom, and there's nothing wrong with that grain. It's quite normal D76 size grain. No acutance. You'll see there just isn't the real sharpness of the edges of these leaves, but it's not an acutance developer, so we're not expecting that. But it is sharp. There is sharpness there, and this is kind of shows us the difference between acutance and sharpness. A developer can be sharp but not have acutance, and that means the acutance brings out the fine details better than this developer does. These lines in this leaf, for instance, they're there, but they're barely there, whereas an acutance developer would have enhanced those and made them more obvious, made them more bold. Something I particularly like in my negatives is more boldness than this developer is giving me. However, look at that. There's not much wrong. There's good contrast there. Let's give it a vignette and just have a look what it might look like with a vignette. Let me turn this on. There. Nice. I like that. So when I print this, I'm going to manually give it a vignette like that. When I do that, if you ever want to do that in your darkroom, I give them around about 1/4 to 1/2 of a stop extra exposure around the edges of the picture. And I move a card in and out just like this, back and forth, just there for, say, 1/3 of a stop. And then I'll do the same here for another 1/3 of a stop. Then the same here and the same here. So my edges, my corners get a little bit more exposure than running along the edge. But that's actually how vignettes look best. Let's go over and have a look at the print. Here's the finished print, and it's just like I imagined I wanted it to look. I've added the vignette. That's a 1/2 stop vignette on each edge. I moved the paper up to around about here and about here and so on, each for 1/2 a stop of the complete exposure time. The exposure time was 16 seconds, so that was an 8-second vignette on each side. It's quite an obvious vignette, and especially now I've told you it's there, you'll notice it, but you can use a 1/4 stop if you want a more subtle vignette in your photographs. I use vignettes a lot in a lot of my images because I do feel they add something to the picture that helps to draw the eye of the observer into the area you want them to be looking at. So let's have a look at the contrast. I'll bring it up closer to the camera there and hold it as still as I can. That's quite nice. Now this was grade 4 to get that contrast, but I wanted that extra enhancement. Other pictures I shot were grade 3.5, which is about right. So 5 minutes, 5.25 minutes is about right for me for development time. Now I said I would tell you about reusing this developer, and you can reuse it up to 10 times and just add 5% to your development time for each film that you run through the stock. Pour the stock back in the bottle, use it for your next film, add another 5%. So the 5% are additive all the way up until you've done 10 films in the developer. So it's actually not particularly expensive to use. It's quite a good developer. I'm pleased. I think Crawley did a good job. I don't think it was a developer that he particularly wanted to be his best. This wasn't his flagship developer. It was probably more an experiment in how fast he could make film, how much enhancement to the EI of film he could do without getting the big grain. His competition was developers like Microfen, and he beat them at their own game here with FX11. Now, if you want to push films, this is not the one he recommends for pushing films. He recommends FX3. So go back and watch my FX3 developer video to see that one if you want to enhance your film speed. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, everybody. I want to say a big thank you to my patrons. They're the ones who bring these videos to you. I'm writing up these developers for my patrons as a book. So if you want that book, if you want to read about these developers and make a booklet of your own, go become a patron and you'll be able to download the PDFs for each developer as I test it. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you again next time.